Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, August 23rd, 2021. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Nikki Usher, author of News for the Rich, White and Blue. Meanwhile, the FDA has granted full approval to the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine, which will, of course, finally shut up the anti-vax crowd, right? But bad news for them. This opens the door for more vaccine mandates. Whoops. Hurricane Henri hit the Northeast hard over the weekend after flash flooding killed at least 22 people in Tennessee. Kirsten Sinema has doubled down after voting yes on the budget resolution for the $3.5 trillion infrastructure package. She's insisting that she'll vote no on that very package, unless it's cut down to meet her arbitrary threshold. And in the House, a group of moderates continues its standoff with Pelosi and progressives, threatening to sink the reconciliation package entirely, but in a twist, the DCCC is threatening to withhold funding if the centrists continue down this road, a bit of a taste of their own medicine. In Afghanistan, mayhem continues. Reports indicate at least 20 people have died in and around the Kabul airport in the last week, some killed by the chaos, some by U.S. forces, many by the Taliban. In northern Afghanistan, though, opposition groups have retaken 3 districts from the Taliban. And lastly, back in the U.S., hundreds of Nabisco workers are on strike at 3 different plants as management has threatened to cut benefits despite recording billions in profits. All this and more on today's program. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a great weekend. I hope you stayed safe. If you're in the Northeast, or if you're in Tennessee, or if you're in any of the regions affected by Hurricane Henri. I think I gotta say it in the French because it's got an I at the end of it, but I don't speak French, so you guys gotta suffer through that. But I hope all is well on your end, and with COVID, I hope everyone's staying safe as well. The numbers still remain quite high with the Delta variant. It feels like we're hitting some sort of peak or plateau. There's no way to know quite yet, but one can only hope, because especially now that the FDA has decided to give the Pfizer vaccine full authorization, I was told that that's all these anti-vaxxers needed, and then they're going to be ready to just get the jab in line the next day. I don't know, forgive my skepticism in that area. Because let's turn to Alabama. Former President Donald Trump held a maskless rally in Alabama on Saturday. And Alabama has been in the news a lot recently for running out of ICU beds as Delta runs rampant, tragically, over the state, one of the least vaccinated states in the country. However, in a twist, the man Donald Trump decided to urge his audience to get vaccinated, and it didn't go that well for him, especially because he could breathe or fart and the whole crowd would cheer normally. But it seems like he's created a monster and he can't control it anymore.
3 days, less than 9 months, and it's great. And you know what? I believe totally in your freedoms. I do. You got to do what you have to do. But I recommend take the vaccines. I did it. It's good. Take the vaccines. But you got, no, that's okay. That's all right. You got your freedoms. But I happen to take the vaccine. If it doesn't work, you'll be the first to know, okay? I'll call up Alabama and say, hey, you know what? But it is working. But you do have your freedoms. You have to maintain that. You have to maintain that. And you got to get your kids back to school.
Right. So he walked it back a bit there, right? You hear those boos.
He walked it back like 4 times. He did. If you just count the buts in that sentence, like, you gotta get your freedoms, but I took it. But
right.
gotta get your freedoms. That is, I think,
but you gotta get the kids back to school.
The dictionary definition of mixed messaging.
Well, yeah, certainly. He is a crowd surfer. He tries to walk back and make the crowd laugh, but there was some tepid kind of frustration or unsuredness that you could feel in the crowd. But as I say, when you create a monster, don't be surprised when you can't control the monster. And even Trump, who tried to pocket COVID denial as a part of a political strategy when he was leaving office, not telling anybody that he'd been vaccinated, and it came out a few months later, not revealing his vaccination status. Even he can't control it, because I think it's an indication of a few things, but one of the main takeaways for me is the man is not in control of the narrative anymore. He's not visible in the way that he once was, and part of that has to do with the fact that he is no longer on social media sites, major ones, and he's having difficulty communicating publicly, and news organizations have made decisions about not just airing every word that he says, which was a huge part of his victory in 2016, just not showing Bernie Sanders rallies at all and waiting with bated breath at Trump's empty podium, for example. But these diehards, yeah, they'll cling to everything he says, 100%, the MAGA crowd.
Well, you can finish your point there.
But many of them are right now just moving on to news sources or new politicians or Marjorie Taylor Greene or whoever to satiate their impulses in this area.
Yeah, I mean, this is the difference between the GOP and the Democrats. The Democrats like to control and sort of finely guide the enthusiasms of their base, whereas the GOP will take whatever enthusiasms they can get where they can get them, because their main project is pretty unappealing, like basically just lower tax cuts for the wealthy. And the thing is, like, Trump could tell them, look, just get the vaccine, you idiots, right? And like, people would boo, but eventually that would have a big effect. But they don't want to do that because ultimately this is too valuable for them electorally.
Exactly. And a good reminder to everybody that in the fall, Trump was getting his base all riled up about the vaccine not being approved fast enough. And this is very much in keeping, Matt and I were talking about this before the show, with a long conservative undercurrent about approval of, say, experimental drugs. They're saying, you need to let the free market decide, and you need to open these up to capitalism so that these treatments can't be behind some government wall of approval.
Yeah, this is a common moral blackmail take you'll hear from the right when particularly the Democrats are in power, that your red tape is stopping X cure from getting to patients. You're basically killing those people. Right.
And now, full FDA approval coming down the pike from the FDA, and so there should be no excuses anymore. But as we'll get to later in the program, that's not the case. This is just the latest iteration of shifting of the goalposts. But I would imagine Trump going forward, if he still wants to run, who knows if that's the case anymore, I would imagine he steers away from some of this vaccine denial. But how can you?
Again, like, they need to like try to harvest as many of those people they can while still, getting people vaccinated at the rate where they can open up businesses and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's pretty gross. I mean, I know COVID's rising in North Dakota. North Dakota is one of the worst as far as getting vaccinated. And, I know weddings happening in a few weeks, and it's, ugly to see. But ultimately, I think you just need to mandate this stuff. And that's ultimately the good news about the CDC thing, is it will allow mandates to be a lot easier. And they just need to be done. And if there's protests and stuff, people can protest. and if they choose to get onto the streets to protest against the vaccine, that can stop them from being a disease vector, as opposed to, like, say, police brutality and violence. That's on them. They can get out and protest.
Right. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will be joined by Dr. Nikki Usher, if we have her. But we're going to throw to Sam. He's got some ads for you from the past.
Hey, folks. Folks are always looking for an opportunity to help others out. And sometimes people do that at the end of the year. Sometimes they do it quarterly. Sometimes they just do it randomly. And for me, I have found that the best place for me to find charities that I may not be aware of and to assess the impact they're going to have is via givewell.org. They've been around since 2010. They have helped over 50,000 donors find places where their donations can save or improve lives the most. GiveWell basically recommends a bunch of different charities. They have a very rigorous and academic and independent studies of the cost effectiveness of all of their programs. Giving to the right charity can be tricky. You don't want your money to go to fly-by-nights or to places that really don't have a big impact. GiveWell is a one-stop place to determine, how they're spending their money, how effective it is, what the ratios are, et cetera, et cetera. GiveWell dedicates over 20,000 hours a year to researching charitable organizations. They handpick a few of the most high-impact, evidence-based charities. Like I say, 50,000 donors have given almost $750 million. These donations will save over 75,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. And here's the best part. GiveWell is free. It's totally free. And GiveWell doesn't take a cut of your donation. They allocate your tax-deductible donation to the charities that you choose. Plus, they publish all of their research online at their site totally for free. For me, I discovered Give Directly. I don't think it's related to GiveWell. And, all the research that we saw over the course of COVID, I think I had seen studies to this in the past, like the best way to help people, the most efficient use of your money is you give the money to them directly. And that's what Give Directly does. There's other charities on there that are great too, but this one really struck me. I had no idea it was out there. When I found it, it has become one of my go-to charities. Give Directly. You can find that at givewell.org. And if you've never donated to GiveWell's recommended charities before, you can have your donation matched up to $1,000 before the end of August, or as long, of course, as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org and pick podcast and the majority report at checkout. Make sure that they know that you heard about GiveWell from the majority report to get your donation matched. It's going to run out at the end of August. So if you want to double your impact, now is the time to do it. Givewell.org. Also, we're living in an era where folks have a lot of on-demand needs and desires. One click. That's what I like to do. If I want something, I like one click. Well, if you're a business out there, understand what I have just articulated is what your customers want. Customers have grown to expect a simpler way of doing business, no matter what your product is. That's why more than 90,000 local businesses of all sizes have turned to Podium. Doesn't matter whether you have one location or 1,000 locations, Podium can help you stay ahead. Podium makes doing business as easy as sending a text. All of your employees can text from a single inbox, offering a smoother experience for all your customers. Doesn't matter whether you're answering questions, whether you're collecting reviews, scheduling appointments and deliveries, or dealing with payment collection. All you have to do is just send a text. Car dealerships are selling more cars by offering text messaging. One dealer just sold a $50,000 truck in 4 text messages. Retailers are increasing revenue by allowing customers to shop via text message. Many people still want to shop from home. Jeweler just sold a $5,000 ring with a few text messages and even coordinated curbside pickup with Podium. I can tell you that in dealing with our IT guy from our router situation, I would love it if they had a simpler system rather than the weird, bizarre Byzantine system that they've got me hooked into. Check it out, folks. Today's customers expect on-demand everything, even from local businesses. Stay ahead of the competition with Podium. They have free plans for growing businesses, plus all the power growing businesses need to scale. Get started free today at podium.com/majority. That's podium.com/majority. Check it out. All of our links are in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Now back to Emma.
Well, folks, the Emma Majority Report is not above our guests not being able to us not being able to get a hold of our guests. So unfortunately, on Friday we had technical difficulties. Not going as smoothly as I thought, the takeover. I guess it's a little bit harder than one would imagine to
this isn't reflecting well on new Brendan Bradley, Emma's takeover, or Matt as the steady hand that's been here for a whole long time.
Yeah, right. So unfortunately we can't get a hold of Nikki, but I was looking forward to the interview. Maybe she'll be able to join us, but for now we're going to talk a little bit more about the news, myself and Matt, with Bradley's new Brendan steady hand behind the scenes. So let's actually, since we were talking a little bit about the vaccine before, I want to talk about or show a clip of Fox News' response this morning. So this morning, Fox News responded to the news that the Pfizer vaccine is going to be getting full approval by the FDA. And this is a clear example of how these goalposts are going to be shifted no matter what the outcome is by Fox News. And just so you understand the ridiculousness of this is Dana Perino. This is considered to be one of the news people, right? Is that fair to categorize her as such?
Yeah, I mean, my memory is that she was like a Bush spokesperson.
Yes.
But yeah, she's, has the patent of been around for 2 decades. So
right. So essentially, though, this is Dana Perino, considered to be on the right, but fine with the establishment, not a crazy loon. This isn't Mike Lindell here. Outflanking Trump on COVID denial, honestly, because we just played the clip of Trump encouraging people to get the vaccine. They're moving.
Look, I got to be responsible, but you have to be free. So let's just find a balance, okay?
Right. And here is how Fox responded to the news about the full approval this morning.
News alert for you now. The FDA just giving full approval to Pfizer's COVID vaccine. It's the first vaccine to get that full approval, and in record time, too. That has critics asking if the process was rushed. Was it? Well,
was it? So another thing that they often do is hide behind critics are saying this, when really it's just, this is the narrative that we want to push for our particular audience. We knew this was going to happen. The full approval thing was just, in terms of the anti-vaxxers' own logic, faulty in and of itself, because it's all, how can we trust the government? How can we trust the for-profit big pharma that's trying to push this vaccine on us?
It was just an anomaly, right? Like they could point to, and one that once it was solved, they weren't going to look at as if, oh, well, I guess that's fixed. I can change my mind about the vaccines now.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so this is going to be what they run with now that it has its full approval. Oh, the full approval was too swift. The full approval happened in a way that I don't necessarily trust. When what the entire thing boils down to is a mistrust of science and institutions, and the fact that a Democrat is in control of the executive branch at this current moment. And it also boils down to, for a lot of evangelical Christians, like this religious pure body thing and trusting in a higher power. So there's a lot of stuff that they're playing into right now, but it's particularly unconscionable when you have the news daytime programming of Fox News more immorally approaching a vaccine conversation than even Trump is at in his current position. Because Trump's like, I don't know, the jab, get the shot. I got the shot. I want everybody to go back to normal life. I mean, or I want you to go back to normal life. And I think a lot of Republican powers that be, I'd imagine he's still talking to people, we're seeing this shift there too, where they're worried about this anti-vaxxer push alienating the suburban women, suburbanites throughout the country, people who they still need to court for them to have any electoral success, even though, of course, there might be some backlash given that Biden's approval rating is falling at the current moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not convinced that they're playing this right electorally. I mean, it's pretty outrageous to say that they're playing a pandemic correctly or not. Like, I think the problem they have is Republicans always appeal to the people that are unaffected by the brutal reality of the systems we have set up, and instead you just drive them to the polls with fear about stuff. But the problem is when the fear is something that they're saying you won't be affected by. And it turns out that all these states that thought, okay, we're going to be done with it. DeSantis made another gamble that he'd just be able to like sort of bluff his way through this and it'd go away on its own and end up killing a whole bunch of people, compared to, say, New York, which saw a rise in cases too, but not a similar rise in deaths, at least not so far. And that's people know the people who died. Fundamentally, we lost over 500,000 people in this country, and it's crazy to me that we still have this amount of resistance to it. But I think this is the route of the Republican Party.
The data is in, right? Like, we've never had such a massive data set of hundreds of millions of people getting the vaccine. And we've had millions and tens of millions of people who've gotten COVID. And we see what the effects of one are and what the effects of the other are. We don't need, I don't even think, the FDA to tell us that. That's why the emergency use happened. And then we had a big experiment, basically, and it played out quite obviously. But when you've trained an entire population to look for alternative answers to dominant narratives and be inherently mistrustful of what a consensus of experts say, they're going to find wrinkles in even the largest of experiments and data sets and the most conclusive outcomes of those things. So conspiratorial thinking being stoked, of course it has its ramifications, and that's clear in terms of just like pure death total.
Yeah, we should also say Mississippi officials warn against using livestock ivermectin to prevent COVID-19 after rise in poison control calls. So that's what another part of this is, to sell Mirocures. First was hydroxychloroquine and now ivermectin.
What is in ivermectin? Is it like a dewormer?
Yeah, it's like some sort of a parasite control thing.
So you're cool with taking a dewormer, but not a shot.
Off-label use, yeah.
Yeah, like, I don't understand where that line is drawn. I guess ivermectin's been around for many decades, not for this particular use, for this novel coronavirus.
And there's ultimately the cynical way too that they play on the like sort of pharma skepticism, as in like, you know, they don't want you to take this horse dewormer drug because it'll cost them a whole bunch of money. It's like, it's
downstream from the elite critique that Tucker Carlson engages in.
Exactly, right. It's basically just like the socialism of fools, sorts of like, take as much as you need, but don't implicate capitalism wholly, whatever you do.
Yeah. And unfortunately, when you have conspiracy theories of that kind, the ones that are most pernicious are the ones that have kernels of truth and skepticism to them. Like, for example, Bush did 9/11. We should be skeptical of the Bush administration and
particularly like putting Henry Kissinger on the investigation team.
Yeah, we should be skeptical of the CIA and the Pentagon and the Bush administration's motives, because they were clearly to just start a war with Iraq by any means possible. But that doesn't mean that Bush did 9/11, right? Like, but the reason maybe people believe in that a little bit more, or it's faded a bit, or at the time it was more widespread, was because of that very kernel of truth there. And here, yeah, Big Pharma is largely an evil enterprise that milks people for profit, but it's really just a function of capitalism, honestly, when you commodify health care. But the skepticism towards Big Pharma in this country is warranted. We've essentially milked people of their money in order to pay for their health care, and people are resentful of these mega corporations that charge them $400 for necessary diabetes treatment or whatever the case may be. So that is something that is being very, very cynically weaponized by people who are in the pocket of those very industries, politicians in the pocket of these very industries. And like, Fox News has no problem with big pharma. Are you kidding me? It's just the shadow of it that they want to use.
Yeah, if you want to stick it to big pharma, you force them to release their patents to the world about these new high-tech vaccines instead of recommending another one of their products people go out and find, right? Like that's what I think part of this is about.
That's why they don't want you to know about it. That's why we're asking you to buy something that puts money directly in their pockets.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, like, I think big pharma, if we want to distress them for a moment, they have this new technology that has been juiced by government funding and the necessity of a pandemic, and they want to keep control of it. So that's what we need to open those patents to the world. And so you want to stick it to pharma, you want a pharma critique, that's where it should be, not take their, raid your veterinary's cabinet.
The issue with that too is because they're not interested in that. They're not interested in that kind of larger scale critique. They want to still engage with capitalism in the same ways that that they always have, but just particularly cling on to this cultural critique. It looks like we actually have Nikki, so let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. All right. I would like to welcome to the show Nikki Usher. She is the author of News for the Rich, White and Blue. Nikki, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So we're coming off, in my opinion, a really clear and obvious display of the media bubble that you described. This elite media consensus in the wake of the Afghanistan withdrawal is a great example of it. I guess let's start there. What were your thoughts, given the fact that you have so much experience in this field, at what you saw in terms of comparatively the public's response, which I think largely is let's get out of Afghanistan, to the entire media losing their minds?
So I think there is like a really interesting inroad to your question, which is the way that the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal put forward their own like public diplomacy effort to rescue anybody that was associated with helping the papers and their families. I think that that is like a really good illustration of kind of on one level, like how the news media doesn't see itself as like everybody else. And that like, it is very rare for those three papers to collaborate on anything. In fact, I don't remember the last time they've co-written a letter like that. Maybe in response to some of the Trump stuff, there was sort of more of an implicit agreement about how to handle the president, but this is like an explicit ask of the Biden administration. And then these papers went ahead on their own and like positioned, and the New York Times had their foreign correspondent is also a Marine, and like they positioned him at the airport to like run logistics to get their people out. And I think that that's like a really, to me, you know, yes, there's the media losing their mind and it's an investment in a story. And yes, there is the differing public response, but sometimes these single actions and single moments really highlight where the power is. And I think that that's a really clear example of like whose lives matter, who has the ability to demand special treatment. And like just kind of like a highlighting of like, the press is the most important thing, right? So I didn't really quite totally answer your question, but I think that that speaks to it almost more, you know?
Yeah, well, it's a great kind of conduit into one of the opening stories in your book about this like lavish DC celebration with the likes of Marty Baron and Bob Woodward, and then there's so much lobster, lots and lots of lobster consumed, and kind of just how that was instructive for the way that you were trying to analyze some of the way that these elite media institutions and media in general is structured in this country. So just talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what was that party, right? So the Washington Post moved into a new building after Bezos bought it, and took about like a year or so. But when you get a new building, you have a big party, and it was a chance to like bring all the DC glitterati together. So these are names that you and I would recognize, but maybe like the ordinary person wouldn't. And it was like this week-long celebration. So the like one night that I went, it was to inaugurate the Page One room as like the Ben Bradley story room. And what struck me was like how detail oriented the display was. So like the scotch was in the proper highball glass, and the wine was in like their wine glass, and the champagne was in a champagne flute. And like, just who thinks about stemware like that? Do you know what I mean? I feel like, and it just
very rich. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe. Right. Like, and then the next day there were like these monogrammed Washington Post napkins and guava juice, which really kind of hit me over the head, and like 3 types of water. And it's like, so sometimes like these material things even say more than anything else, but it's also like who other than the Post would get the Secretary of State to like welcome their building, right? And say like, congratulations. And so it was like, it felt so closed off to the reality of A, what was happening at other newspapers and media outlets across the country. But B, just being physically situated there in Washington, right, across the street from the new Post building is where probably like the largest concentration of homeless people really are in downtown DC. And it's like, we're here having guava juice, and, you know, there are all these like really truly poor people outside, and you can't even really see them from the windows, you know? And it kind of just that sense of detachment, especially in the wake of the Trump administration. It wasn't just about the news media's detachment. It was about like how detached they were from like the rest of the American experience.
So let's talk about then the kind of homogeneity of newsrooms. They tend to be rich, cosmopolitan, also geographically homogeneous, which I thought was a really interesting, you know, part of your book, and white. And there are ramifications for that dynamic. And also the fact that journalism is not, when you're starting out, it's essentially really difficult to make ends meet if you're coming at it from a background that isn't somebody who has money already in the bank. So talk about all of these factors that craft modern newsrooms, especially at some of these elite institutions that have so much sway over the way people in power see things and how the conversation goes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that like when we talk about what's going on in journalism in America and like the decline of trust in news and all of that, and it's often phrased from like a supply side or a demand side problem. Like people don't want this stuff, or people are reading misinformation, or whatever, the current, people don't trust news anymore. Whereas really you need to focus the debate on what you can control. And what you can control is what your newsroom looks like and what your news looks like, right? And so what is happening right now is kind of like a survival of the biggest. So a lot of the smaller, more local, and when I say local, I mean like the Chicago Tribune. I don't mean like a small, tiny paper, because those two are very straight threatened. But it's like the big papers are more with the biggest audiences, because of the way that digital economics work, are more likely to survive. And those big papers are in places that have traditionally been media capitals, right? Like New York and DC. And it's not just papers, it's like CNN, right? And CNN's kind of interesting, I think, because as you've seen more coverage of Georgia and Atlanta through, right? Usually it's like people forget that CNN is even in Atlanta. Right. But with COVID, you've seen how CNN has like owned that Atlanta and Georgia presence. But kind of more to the point around like who gets to be part of these newsrooms. Well, how do you set yourself up to work at one of the elite national newsrooms in this country? Well, you intern there, right? And who can afford to intern? Well, maybe you get lucky because you happen to go to school in New York, and so you're not paying for extra housing to work at like a New York publication, or a New York outlet. But when you think about like how hard it is to just as a student get to one of these big cities, pay rent for the summer, like, and then maybe not even get paid for your job, right? Like that unpaid internship circuit or poorly paid internship circuit, just by the nature of like just very basic starting out, cuts out huge potential journalists, right? Just because of the way that is structured. And I think like we don't like to talk about pipelines because it seems like such a narrow intervention, but you have to think about it as a pipeline, because who gets to have an internship dictates who ultimately gets to run a news organization, right?
Well, yeah, and we're seeing a lot of this too with the New York Times unionization fight. I don't know if you followed that at all. I'm sure you did. Yeah. But you had big name reporters like Maggie Haberman opposing the unionization fight. And then you have hundreds of people who are working on staff there who probably, a lot of them, as you say, may already have affluent backgrounds because they're in the room. I mean, that's what's difficult about that, is because the majority of people who are in the room are there because they had the advantages to be there. I guess just talk about that particular fight as it fits into your thesis.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that it's really important to note that the New York Times does have journalists that are coming from CUNY and some of the, local schools. And I think that the problem is like, how empowered are those journalists and how much harder is it for them to be heard? And I know that it is harder for journalists who are not coming from Harvard to get heard and noticed. They have to work twice as hard, or sometimes 3 times as hard, particularly if they're a journalist who is non-white. And so I think like with regard to the unionization fight, it's actually an old fight. And it's a fight that begins with the story of whether digital content is worth as much in terms of labor as sort of content that would run in the print paper, right? And for the longest time, anybody who was like a strictly New York Times digital employee, because of the way that their contract was structured, got paid less, just by the virtue of the fact that their single output was going to be digital first. And obviously that's become incredibly archaic, right? And the unionization effort itself, I think, reflects larger tensions at the Times, where the Times, on one hand, has a generation of journalists who are like, who do care about social justice, but they also see themselves as like doing fact-based journalism, right? Can those two coexist? Well, for a younger generation of journalists, I absolutely think that that's the case. Those are journalists also who don't have the houses in Montclair yet, right? These are journalists who are struggling. Like, you can have like a backup plan, and you can have, know that if you miss a month's rent, maybe you can borrow it from your parents, but that's really different than being able to like afford to have a life in New York. Right. And so I think that kind of more woke generation of young journalists, one, they don't see any difference between like what their journalism looks like and what the kind of like ultimate way people first meet it is, right? But also like to some degree, it's just a culture, like a real culture war almost at the times about, and I think if I had to call it, my guess is that when Dean Baquet steps down, that choice of who becomes the editor-in-chief is going to tell you a lot about how much that new generation of voices is going to be listened to. It's a really huge decision.
So one of the things you wrote about too was kind of the effect that was felt in the 2016 election. And just, I mean, some of the issues and the critiques that were laid bare just by the response to that and the things missed, and also the writing that followed. What were some of the dynamics that you felt Trump's victory exposed in a lot of these papers and larger outlets?
Yeah. And so I should say, just by the way, for like the ethos of being able to speculate on the Times, I did write a whole book on the Times called Making News at the New York Times. So like, it's not totally coming out of nowhere for anybody tuning in. So as far as sort of your question about what 2016 showed us, I think it's what 2016 and 2020 showed us, to be quite honest, which is that numbers don't tell the whole story, and you can't get the pulse of a country just by polling it. And you can't get the pulse of a country just by listening to political operatives who are in DC.
Tell Nate Silver that, please.
I know. Unfortunately, there's a lot of like political communication scholars who don't find Nate Silver to be their best friend right now. But I mean, I start so many of my talks with that 71% Clinton like slide, that slide of her predicting, like Nate Silver's like prediction of 71% like that Hillary would win, right? And what happens is, for those of us who pay a lot of attention to politics, we think of politics as a game. And I think there's nothing that exemplifies that more than like that New York Times crazy like dial ticker thing. That whole thing, right? And it's not. It's people on the ground who like have experiences that are not like yours. And if you're coming from New York City, it's really easy to not know what's going on and to judge them for living a life that's different than yours. And I really do feel this, especially now, because I live in central Illinois and I can walk to a cornfield. And like there's so much geographic disconnection, because some of the places that are now referenced as rural America, I've been to, and I know that it's not like that, right? And I know that some of the dynamics they're trying to tease out by these road trips on the Trump safari or like the anti-vax safari, some of those very same dynamics can be playing out right in New York or DC, And so I think one of the biggest problems is treating the rest of the country as a caricature rather than the rest of the country as it actually exists. And that is a massive blind spot that I think requires continual self-examination.
So is part of that solution having hubs throughout the country for more of these major papers?
I think we saw a really important trend happening when people started delisting, like, you need to be in DC. There are some journalists, or New York, right, that this can be located outside of there. And I think it's really interesting. There are some journalists who are trying to cover national politics from Texas, for example. Like, what does it mean to cover national politics outside of the nation's capital, right? So I do think bureaus and hubs are one solution. I also think, look, a lot of these really, really talented local journalists have, like, they don't have the same kind of support they used to have from their news organizations. There's a lot of talent that's locally based that can be scooped up and used to the advantage of these large outlets. And I think you're starting to see some of that. But it's hard to, I mean, a lot of these efforts think that, you know, St. Louis is a small city, and it's not, you know, and I think that that's like, you know, or we can cover the South from Atlanta, which just also right. And so I think it's like about being really strategic about using local talent that's unused, and better connecting to the organizations that are on the ground to really surface those narratives. And unfortunately, big national news outlets don't always think that much of the reporters that are on the ground, because otherwise they would be working for their national news outlet, right?
Well, so then that kind of brings it back to this reinforcing dynamic, self-reinforcing dynamic, where you have people from affluent backgrounds in these newsrooms who don't really see the value in bringing in voices that are more locally based in the areas that they're reporting, and then it creates this gap in coverage. And then after these elections, there's a reckoning. How did we get this wrong? How did we not understand this? And I guess part of this, a lot of people talk about the decline of local news as like one of the bigger reasons, but you had a pretty interesting take on this romanticism of the local newspaper that you wrote about, which is basically a myth in many ways in the way that it's portrayed. Talk about that, because I think that's where maybe some of your critique really does diverge from what a lot of people in the news business are trying to propose as a solution.
So it is true that we are more focused as a nation on national politics and on national news media. And that's where sort of like the attention is, right? But the solution is not to prop up these decaying local newspapers. I mean, I think that it's really important to recognize that even some of the best big metropolitan newspapers in this country have really sordid legacies when it comes to race. I think the LA Times recent series, The Reckoning, where current reporters and, you know, journalists at the Times talk about their own experiences of being discriminated against at the newspaper, is a really formidable reminder of how these large institutions, even some of the best of them, remain mostly white institutions that have not, you know, really connected with the communities that they serve. So that's one thing. But when we start talking about like this vision of, oh my gosh, if there aren't local journalists on the ground, there are going to be school boards that go uncovered, and there are going to be sewer boards that go uncovered, and everything's going to be super corrupt now. Well, in a lot of these towns and counties across the United States, the person who runs the school board also runs the local newspaper. And I think like that it's a very misguided, very metropolitan based understanding of what local news in a community is like, because in many regards, that community newspaper, and I'm talking about like a 30,000 circulation daily, like in the one in this place where I live, that is pro-business conservatism, isn't questioning, like, you know, we had this case where a hospital is full based on actual data, but the PR person comes out and says like, oh no, we're fine. And the paper doesn't question that. So it's not like there's this like huge accountability journalism that has been happening. That's a fantasy for the vast.
It's like a fantasy out of To Kill a Mockingbird.
It is.
Right?
And
childish.
Even that, sorry, you're getting me worked up. But like even the To Kill a Mockingbird, can you imagine? That's like that had to have been a segregationist newspaper, right? Like,
well, right. If you think about it a little too hard, it doesn't. It doesn't really square with the romanticism that a lot of people in media have about their profession, which also translates to elitism and this insular kind of dynamic that you're talking about. I also thought this was such a really a great part of your book, where you talk about how the subscription model for a lot of these newspapers is reinforcing some of these very dynamics, right? Because it's making journalism, quality journalism that's funded, even though with all of the biases that we're talking about, but say like investigative reporting in a way that isn't accessible to a lot of papers. It's making it a private good. And so then it's the rich and white pay for the news, and the rich and white are in the newsrooms. And that's this like kind of pocket. Talk about the ramifications of that.
Yeah, so I think what people who aren't in the news industry don't always realize is just how dire it is to have a digital first outlet or a newspaper, because the digital advertising ecosystem has completely collapsed. And so what that means is you need to rely more on subscribers or members or whatever you want to call them. And so who are the kinds of people that are most likely to subscribe to a news outlet? And we know who those people are. And then when you have to really reorient your strategy as a news organization around not necessarily just, serving advertisers, but really like targeting those people who can and will pay, that changes and distorts coverage that was already distorted. Right. And Jack Schaefer in Politico the other day, he called it subscriber bait. And I think that that's exactly what's happening. And I also don't want to lose sight of the asymmetric polarization in some of this, right? So that like Republicans and Democrats have very different levels of distrust in the news media. And based on public opinion polling, we know that liberals are just more likely to subscribe to local news. And they do this even if it's not very good. It's like a sense of moral obligation, a sense of civic duty. And so I think that changes the contours too. I think we can have a much larger conversation about like, is the news media liberal, blah, blah, blah. But I think when you think about the subscriber base, there are people who are willing to pay for news. They're most likely white because the institutions are white and have served white audiences, and they're liberal. And that is really concerning to me. It should be concerning to us all.
Yeah, but the dynamic is really interesting too, because they're paying for news that is objective, right? Like they're on the left for the most part, but they're trying to pay for news and subscribe to news that is fact-based and not as opinionated as, say, the media that people on the right are consuming. And like, isn't that interesting that, there's this whole cohort of kind of more elite liberals that want to pay for subscriptions to these papers that don't like, or don't really even want the appearance of their news being tilted in a certain way, and then the right has zero problem with that. Like, I mean, with that kind of valley between the two is problematic in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're hitting on one of the most difficult problems to disentangle right now, which is what is it that really continues to drive the distrust that Republicans have in institutional news media? So I think that like when you look at news on the left for the left, it's just simply not as large of an ecosystem, right? And the question is, why is that? Is it because liberals are looking for, like what you say, fact-based media? Or is it because the news is itself, following a liberal agenda that liberals then associate with, right? And it's implicit rather than explicit. I think that, one of the tensions is that many liberals do want their journalism to do more. And I think that that's why you see whenever the New York Times is overly neutral, right, that a whole host of liberals will say cancel NYT. So I think I would maybe trouble that premise a little bit that, they want fact-based news. Yes, they want reality-based news. That's different, right?
I was more characterizing it in terms of like their perception of what they're paying for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really good question, right? Because I don't know if we know. Right. I think their perception is that they're paying for reality-based news, and their expectations may be that they want to see it straight. But when that seeing it straight doesn't square with a larger agenda of social justice, I think that's where you see the fissures start to happen. Right. And I think you see this particularly around issues of race and the way that these big institutions are covering race.
Well, so how you also talk about the response to Black Lives Matter by some of these institutions. Can you talk about what you found there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we're seeing now in journalism is one of the most existential debates that we can see, which is this debate over whether objectivity makes sense at all. And what does it mean to be objective, and where does that stance of objectivity come from? And one of the things that we saw with Black Lives Matter was that Black journalists were saying, like, I can't be objective. This is my livelihood. Like, this is my life. This is my son's life. This is like, how am I supposed to be distanced from this, right? And then you saw more journalists with COVID even, right? Like, how am I distanced from COVID when this is something I'm seeing and living in my own community? And so how do you really reasonably detach an experience of struggle from the experience of trying to cover that, quote, factually? What does that mean? And I think that in the early sort of post George Floyd moment that we saw, there were some pretty big missteps. I think that the Philadelphia Inquirer published a column header that said, all buildings matter, with like nice art. And it's like, all buildings matter. How did that happen?
Oh,
Philadelphia,
no.
like, how did that happen? Right? Like, first of all, Philadelphia as a city is still is majority Black at this point. So like, what happened in the newsroom that nobody caught, that like all buildings matter too is like a problem, right? And it ended up being a big issue, and the executive editor ended up leaving. The Times published the Tom Cotton op-ed where it called for, troops to move into the cities to control Black Lives Matter protests. And like, what was really unusual about that is New York Times journalists actually spoke out about how that wasn't okay. That was not an okay decision of the Times. And usually dissent at the Times is very muted, right? You don't see it. And so those moments where it breaks out are particularly noteworthy. But news organizations are, the adaptation we saw was the AP deciding to capitalize B in Black and giving better guidance on how do you define a racist? Do you have to know they're purely racist in their heart to call somebody a racist? And the answer is now no. So those are the kinds of changes we see in an institutional journalism response. But the institutions themselves, I think, are not meaningfully responding, not only to the world around them, but to their own journalists.
Right. And a lot of what I see is not necessarily imbued with any class-based analysis, unfortunately. Like, I feel like, yeah, the capital of B, and then we're not really talking more seriously about kind of the institutions that are given credibility or given weight in terms of what's determined to be like an objective fact set for this story, where like it's built on a house of cards, this objective story, because the police that are reporting, giving you these objective facts for your article, that's not objective. The statistics that you're using for this might be skewed in a certain direction. That's not necessarily objective. Like, there's so many layers to what's being reported on that have a faulty foundation that I still feel like is not necessarily being explored.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think the cases that we see it most are taking the word for granted with the military and taking the word for granted. So like with like the military industrial complex with like police and military, I think you see this hardcore. And I think that like part of it is, I think it's a badass factor, like especially with the military. It's like, whoa, these dudes like have gone in and like done some serious, like fighting, and like these are big weapons, so they must know what they're talking about, like deference to authority. That's why we need more veterans in newsrooms, actually, I think. But also with police, it's like that is the thing that you are taught in journalism school or at a journalism internship is like, you want to know a crowd estimate at a protest, ask the police. But if that protest is a Black Lives Matter protest over police involved murder/shooting, like, what's their incentive to give you an actual count, even if they are good at giving crowd counts, right? And so I think, again, we're seeing some responses. And I think one of the most interesting is the pushback on mugshots, because mugshots are like people at their very worst moment, and being arrested doesn't mean you're guilty. And who gets arrested more than other people? People of color, people who are low income. And so you catch somebody at their worst moment, and then you put their photo up as a slideshow gallery to get clicks. and they lose their kids. Right. And you're starting to see some news organizations recognize that. So at least there are bones. There are bones here, Emma.
Yes. Well, I mean, and hopefully that those bones are a bit of a stronger foundation than the one I just described. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whatever's built going forward. But Dr. Nikki Usher, her book is called News for the Rich, White and Blue. I really appreciate your time today, Nikki. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to wrap things up. So I thought that was fascinating and good for, I'm glad we were able to get Nikki to join us. Because I think given last week's news with Afghanistan, particularly with what we've seen over the past few decades about how sources are, especially when it comes to Langley sources or government sources, are used for specific purposes and can't necessarily be trusted. And so, like, you know, this isn't just to say all of, you know, fake news or whatever. There's still, we go to the Washington Post and New York Times for news of the day on the regular, but there's just substantive differences between sourcing on different stories and what you can trust, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I also think it's weird, for instance, to get Afghanistan news from Mika Brzezinski and John McCain's daughter. But
well, apparently some people find value in that, according to the ratings. But
that's our American media, folks.
All right, we have to say goodbye to our Peacock audience. We will see you tomorrow. Whoa.
I mean, if Meghan McCain is objectionable. Just saying.
I threw that right in at the end. All right, folks. Thank you for bearing with us. We're glad we were able to get Nikki. We just had a miscommunication in terms of the time. But everyone should check out that book. We are going to go into the fun half, do some more clips, take some calls, have a grand old time. Maybe crack open a beer. Probably not. But Matt and I were saying
maybe on Friday.
Matt and I were saying we're going to do that on Friday, actually.
Somebody sent us a box of, I thought it was HelloFresh.
Well, it was in a HelloFresh box, and
which is not what you want to get on a Friday when Sam's not here, because it's like, oh no, I mean, there's old I don't know,
rotting food in there.
Quesadilla ingredients in there.
Not that the food would inherently be rotting, but we just didn't know how long.
But I didn't want to have to carry it across Brooklyn. It's not my food. I wasn't prepared for like a random HelloFresh box.
Right. So we were gonna distribute it in another way, but I opened the box after everyone left. What's in the box? And it was not Gwyneth Paltrow's head. It was a lot of beer. So thank you for...
It's a lot easier to deal with.
Yes, so we stuck that in the fridge. Figured that maybe to celebrate my final day of the long hosting gig, we'll crack open a beer on Friday. But anyway, we're going to head into the fun half. What's happening on Left Reckoning this week, though, Matt?
Yesterday, we had a really good interview. I can't figure out patron stuff for Left Reckoning because we do so much stuff, and then I'm like, I can't keep this behind a paywall. But for now, it's behind a paywall. Nikki and Emma, she's a lead organizer for Game Workers United and also Communication Workers of America's campaign to organize digital employees. We talked about the Activision Blizzard lawsuit. and the frat boy culture and sort of like just harassment endemic to video games industry, and why unions and not boycotts are the solution. We always hear about like boycott this, boycott that, and of course in terms of BDS obviously there's a clear model of that working, but when it comes to things like consumer products like video games, the knee-jerk reaction shouldn't be to boycott a game, even if the employees are being sort of abused, which they often are. That's not the solution. You need to just empower those employees with the union. So we talked to Emma yesterday about that. People should check that out at patreon.com/leftreckoning.
Check out the No McKee show. And of course, like the stream, Poggers, Hype Train.
Oh, also go subscribe to Left Reckoning's YouTube channel, because you're already on YouTube. Just go do that.
Right. New tab. Don't close out of this show. God forbid.
No, or at least come right back, you know.
Yeah.
I expect you can find your way back.
Yeah. I would hope. I would hope. All right, guys. 646-257-3920. See you in the phone.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
We are back. And I am back in the nick of time. Oh, cutting it close. Clown Shoes Mike. Speaking of beer, I emailed Majority Reporters a while back about sending y'all some beer, but no one responded. I designed labels for a craft beer company. I thought that was you who sent this. So when Sam's back, he'll follow up with you. Appreciate it.
Other stuff is legal too now. I mean, you might need to
maybe not to send through the
lobby
mail.
a little bit.
Maybe don't
okay.
encourage.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, don't encourage mail sending of that, perhaps. But
violating interstate commerce laws.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, consult your local rule books.
Yeah, right. Jay Schiavone, FYI, as press secretary for W. Bush, Dana Perino got caught footed at the podium when a journal referenced the Cuban Missile Crisis. She had never heard of it. Well, that's not good. Jake the teacher, NYC announced a vaccine mandate for all school employees. The union is negotiating what happens to those with medical exemptions. No details yet, but already some anti-vax workers saying they will take unpaid leave. This leaves those schools shorthanded 3 weeks before opening. It's just like cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's ridiculous. And Majority Report wardrobe coordinator. This is a long one. Orlando is facing a water shortage because some of the liquid oxygen used to treat the water has been diverted to the hospital to treat unvaccinated COVID patients. This is horseshit. Every unvaccinated individual over 18 should be refused care immediately. I don't know about that.
I don't agree with that, but I mean, it is just a colossal, like, just almost like hard to comprehend state failure that, okay, we need to decide between safe water and oxygen at the hospital. And I mean, I just can't help but think of the context of the piddling around we're doing with moderates in Congress and their reconciliation bill, as if that's even remotely up to the task. I mean, the way I look at that is like, it's sort of good if we had been doing that as regular maintenance, those sorts of big bills. But as far as like catching up with just the rot in this system that, for instance, leaves Orlando with a boil water notice because it has to send oxygen to the hospital is just, I mean, it's outrageous.
Unbelievable. So I understand your rage, but don't necessarily agree with that. I understand this is probably illegal, but then give them the bare minimum. Stick it to them in a tent outside with one nurse, and please stop blaming media indoctrination on their terrible behavior. They booed their cult leader when he said something they didn't like. They went on OAN and Newsmax after Fox said Trump blocks the election. They go to whomever tells them what they want to hear. They make a conscious decision to be this way because they don't want to admit they were wrong on social media and swallow their stupid pride. Some people are just human garbage.
I also disagree that this is about the people, and I think you should have realized you were I mean, I understand the frustration, but like like the idea that Trump was doing his best to tell them to get the vaccine then is just not true. And we are bombarded with just a massive amount of bullshit in this country by capitalist media, and you should not blame people for being propagandists. I understand that people are annoying, but ultimately, like, you have to look at why they act certain ways in certain contexts and other ways in America under, you know, our capitalist media system.
And as leftists, on principle, we provide healthcare for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, that's yeah, I mean, the amount of ill will you'll cause by leaving family members. I got to tell you what, I have people who aren't vaccinated yet. I don't want them to be left out on the street either. I think like, and it's definitely a problem when you're running negative on ICU beds, and I understand that, but that's also a problem with austerity in the system in general, right? Like, we're gonna have to be able to deal with disease in this country. Just how big the world's getting, and we're like, that's the thing with like Cuomo, right? The cutting hospital capacity right before this is just a recipe for deaths on a large scale.
So again, totally sympathize with the frustration, but
fundamentally there's nothing productive in figuring out how this is individual people's fault.
Yep.
Like, and how we can make this the fault of people far removed from power. There's just nothing besides an emotional release, maybe.
We're going to take a call, calling from an 847 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from? You've been on hold for a while.
Hi, it's Josh from Chicago.
Hey, Josh from Chicago. How you doing?
Let's not talk about Saturday.
I thought I recognized 847, and I figured when you were the first caller that you might take umbrage with my tweets.
I'm not on Twitter. I was saying that, but I probably would, and I know you enjoyed that. And also,
I actually don't enjoy it.
comment.
Matt Nagy's such a damn idiot, and I feel so bad for Trubisky and what he like put him through that I actually get mad about it.
Didn't I say I didn't want to talk about it?
Okay, sorry, Josh. Keep going.
It is just a preseason game, though.
Fields looks good. Fields look good. Looks good.
But yeah, no, actually, because you were talking about vaccines. Anthony Rizzo of the Yankees, actually, who's a cancer survivor. I don't know if you saw this. He said that he wanted to see more data on the vaccines. And presumably, he's a high-risk individual, given that he's a cancer survivor, and he got COVID. And so I think there's just like a lot of, hopefully, the FDA's approval of this. Like, I don't know. I just think, like, at this point, these people are anti-vax, and, like, I hope they don't get sick, but I have very little, like, sympathy for their act in terms of, like, their reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think indulging this reasoning and not calling it out for what it is, like, kind of dangerous.
Well, I will say this. There are two people I know, not particularly close, but someone in my life is trying to convince them to get vaccinated. And he's found that the full FDA approval has been ineffective with these. They're not like anti-vax on principle, but they're just like ignorant about the pandemic, which is crazy. And so hopefully, like, that provided me with a small amount of hope, but I think that's just a sliver of people who are not vaccinated yet, who are actually like, this is moving the needle for them, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And there's hearing the athletes' takes on this as well is sort of shocking. But I mean, yeah, I'm hopeful. I have a friend who, I mean, I'm hopeful. I've offered him opportunities to, like, take him to get vaccinated and et cetera. You know, I hope I can get him vaccinated. But I actually did want to call in because I know, Emma, you're a huge movie person, and Matt, I wanted to hear your take on this if you had seen it, because I feel like this might be a left reckoning topic maybe, but it could be discussed here. Have either of you seen The Suicide Squad? And what is your take on the anti or pro, I don't think it's pro-imperialist, but what is your take on what it is saying about imperialism in Latin America? Specifically, the very real history it covers about Panama.
I haven't seen it, but I heard it was like surprising that they waded into this territory. Matt, go.
I am completely unaware of really even what Suicide Squad is, and certainly their treatment of Panama. I
read a review of it, and I heard that it was like shockingly anti-imperialist.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, we'll see it. I would say that I think it tries to have it both ways at times, but I would say that it was, and I would love to hear like a further take on like the way Hollywood represents imperialism on screen, especially in Latin America, because I just think like it's very exciting to see like a movie like this that actually does delve into real history about Panama. And like I was reading a foreign policy article about how close the I mean, I read it as Venezuela, of course, and then not knowing about Panama, reading about Panama, it's pretty accurate or close sort of parallel to what happened in Panama. But I would love to hear, like, maybe when you see it, just like your takes on this, because I think it is more liberal than leftist, unfortunately.
Right.
As a sort of like, I guess a principled leftist take would be that no imperialism can ever be justified. But having said that, I think it's as good as we'll see a liberal take on sort of intervention and imperialism in Latin America.
Well, from like a big budget superhero movie.
From a big budget superhero movie.
I would imagine too, it's rated R, so it allows it to go to different places, which is kind of this new trend in superhero movies, which is interesting. I'm not a big superhero movie person, but I do like following the business. And I heard good things about that storyline from people, like, but obviously, you know, Josh, I trust your opinion. I might see it just to have a critique of that, but like, oh man, I'm so, I hear it's good, but I'm so cynical about the fact that they're remaking the same damn concept and just slapping a "the" in front of it, and just redoing that. Unbelievable, but I hear it's actually good. I hear it's getting good reviews, and it's high energy and, you know, well done.
Yeah. I mean, I the first one's a mess.
The first one was one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life.
Terrible.
Terrible.
I think Yeah, I think this one's really good, and I think it actually does. Like I said, there is enough there in what it's talking about politically to do like an episode of a podcast, and I would love to hear it sometime. Just
okay.
I mean, it's interesting. It's like Judas and the Black Messiah, which is a movie I enjoyed, but what I even enjoyed more from that is hearing from actual Panthers about where it goes wrong and what the reasons for that might be. I'm a little bit ambivalent about the idea that this sort of history is, becoming content for, massive sort of entertainment industry. Except, I am somebody who thinks that it does do some good if it can lead people into looking into the reality of it a little bit more. And I guess it remains to be seen if Suicide Squad does that.
Yeah, the Suicide Squad.
Oh, sorry.
Come on, man. All right, yeah, cheers. Thanks so much for taking my call.
Appreciate it, Josh. Later.
Good talk.
All right.
Should make a movie called The Suicide Squad about the older Kennedy brother who died on a proto-drone in World War II.
They should do that. You should pitch it. Calling from a 214 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
That is you. This is you.
Oh, hey. Hey, MR crew. Real quick, I did want to say...
Name, please. Where are you from?
Oh, my apologies. This is Cameron from Mississippi.
Cameron from Mississippi.
The Suicide Squad isn't a reboot. It's more like it ties in from the last movie, but ignores all the plot from it.
So that's a reboot. That's basically the studio saying our first try at this sucked ass, so we're gonna do the same kind of concept and change the story a bit.
Is this like how they keep doing like Spider-Man and Superman movies?
No,
no, it's not quite that.
They do that so they don't lose the intellectual property. That's what they do for Spider-Man, and Fantastic Four. But keep going.
So this was just like Viola Davis still has her character, and they keep the same plot, but they ignore the mess of the last movie.
It's just so cynical, but I still hear it's good. I hate like what it stands for. But anyway.
So I just had a quick fun question. So the right wing in this country has tons of really horrible, stupid, like culture war things that they use to distract from real issues. Like right now, it's like everything is CRT.
Mm-hmm.
Before it was like politically correct. So my question is, if you guys could delete one of them from existence and you would never have to deal with it again, which one would you guys delete and why?
Wait.
Which like sort of one of their tropes?
Yeah, so there's examples like CRT, politically correct, trans agenda, like those types of
bell curve. I would love
them bring up.
I would love to not have to deal with bell curve shit anymore.
Cancel culture for me by a mile. Cancel culture.
Okay.
Job creator.
That's ones you don't really hear a ton anymore.
Well, or it's like, or trickle down economics, like something about just, some of the ways they massage the tax cuts for the rich. I mean, like the other stuff's easier to kind of, I think, debunk pretty quickly. But when you muddy the waters about how fucked our economic system is, it's a little bit harder to untangle, in my view.
Well, yeah, I just had that one quick question because I was curious what annoyed y'all the most about those.
All right, appreciate it, Cameron. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye. All right, calling from a 308 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it is Kowalski from Nebraska.
What's up, Kowalski? How are you?
Not a whole lot. We've gotten some decent showers. It's actually been a fairly wet August, which is a good thing going this late into the season because the rivers were all starting to run dry.
Hey, I thought we weren't supposed to do sexual innuendos on the show anymore. I'm sorry. Just keep going.
Damn, now I'm starting to blush. Anyways, just wanted to give you guys a quick rundown on some ag-related stuff. By and large, like I had said last week when Sam was on, it's looking like production is going to be fairly decent. Favorable weather here at the end, but there was a bit of a drought over the summer, which will hurt some yields, particularly around Minnesota and northern Illinois. Other than that, we're still expected to be fairly good, which is good for, the food supply. But long-term wise, droughts are going to be the biggest killer. And with basically with the loss of sea ice, polar vortexes are going to become a more common phenomenon, which is going to devastate livestock production. So just the early effects of climate change are going to be devastating to agriculture, and until we can get a handle on that, I don't really see how midterm is going to, we're really going to be able to see anything other than the U.S. slowing down its exports and the third world basically starving, which really does suck.
Kowalski, I was talking to my parents. North Dakota had a string of 100-degree days, like a week or something like that. And these sorts of events are more and more common in the ways, it'll make my parents say things like, I've never experienced something like that before. How aware are the other people in agriculture around you, or in the communities in general? Are they aware? Like, what's the conversation like?
I honestly think a lot of people do understand that it is climate change, but are too headstrong to actually admit it. Because I have a few neighbors who are still farming in their 80s because they're lunatics. And basically, when they were my age, 40, 60 years ago, they could pretty much follow the farmer's almanac to understand, roughly when rain should come, when the best time to plant would be, when you would expect harvest to be, when you would expect dry spells. And basically the averages just aren't holding anymore. And the weird thing is that in the summer, the averages for rainfall have been actually holding, but it's because of one big storm as opposed to several smaller showers. And stuff like that is terrifying because, A, it destroys your infrastructure, and B, it may look like you got the rain, but the runoff from it means you're not actually retaining the resource. It's a little different in the Dakotas down to Nebraska and Kansas because our soil is a bit more sandy than when you head further east into the grain belt where it's a little more clay and you can actually hold water. But the more this keeps happening, the more it's going to screw with the average, and that's really going to be the killer because basically since the year without a summer, we've never really experienced an environmental condition on a large enough scale to trigger a famine. Usually it's all man-made mismanagement is the only reason famines have occurred since then. But I mean, one Tanatuva event, and a lot of people are going to go hungry. Not us, just because we have so much land area and livestock we could kill if needed. But I mean, just on the whole, this is going to be really dangerous if we don't get something in place. I'm still banking on lab-grown meats, but even then, that won't really work if the crops keep getting wiped out.
I did this interview on that very topic for the Peacock show, and it's not looking good. There's a lot of VC money in it because they want to get in on the next big thing.
Just a nightmare. I mean, if you want to fuck something up, get venture capitalists in charge of it. I mean, I think we need to. A fifth of the Pentagon should be towards this sort of stuff.
A national VC fund, honestly.
Well, I mean, no, not even. I mean, yeah, except no venture capitalists themselves.
Well, meaning just a national fund to spur innovation.
Right, exactly. Whereas venture capitalists are people who collect fees on bullshit ideas.
Yeah. But anyway, Kowalski, I appreciate it's harrowing, but I appreciate the update.
Well, stay optimistic because, like I keep telling everyone, we have the technology and all of the means and the programs to fix this. You just got to find somebody in charge to actually implement them, which could be the killer.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
Remember to vote,
I'm a killer.
people.
I'm a killer.
See ya.
Bad Kowalski. All right, let's do some clips. Let's do some clips. We got a good amount of good stuff today. Good amount of the good stuff. Oh God. Let's talk about this Rob O'Neill thing. So, Fox News contributor Rob O'Neill, former Navy SEAL guy, vocal Twitter conservative, he seems to just kind of want to be in the Taliban. Like, pull up this tweet, Bradley, of his the other day, if you could. This guy's a real psycho, as you're about to see in this Fox News appearance, but you'll get a little appetizer here. Did you see how the Taliban rolled through the streets and took back their country? I know a few dudes who would do the same with me right now. Oh, bro, sick brag, bro.
Oh, Taliban envy is so funny.
I know, right? Maybe that says something a little bit about you. Like, these conservatives like this, they strike this tricky balance of wanting to be like the Taliban while also hating all Muslims. So if only we had just like a white Taliban.
This is the truth of sort of war hawks in general, is like the right and reactionary, like military sort of parts of every country are symbiotic, even though they say they hate each other. Like the hawks in Iran and the hawks here, they're
taking notes.
They're gifts to each other.
Yeah. So
if not, collaborating.
Right. And so if nothing is more of an indication of that very dynamic and how the militaristic right wing and the fantasies that they share, it's transnational, than this unhinged appearance by that very man on Fox News the other day.
I don't want to be in charge, but if I was, I want to get the Americans? Cool. Give me 9 guys. I'm going to walk through the streets, and I'm going to kill everyone I see, and I'm going to grab the Americans. It is not difficult. But we have these people who are in charge that are a disgrace. I am amazed that there hasn't been at least 30 generals and admirals that haven't resigned or been fired today. But we won't, because we have a commander-in-chief that was put there through whatever happened at 4 in the morning on election night. This is not...
Oh, whatever happened. Whatever happened at 4 in the morning on election night. Like, the just bloodlust and the complete fantasy. Part of this is just like downstream from this nationalist desire to like be a G.I. Joe. That's kind of what it is. They're children cosplaying, and I understand he's been in war, but like they have these fantasies of going in there and killing everybody and being the hero and being Mr. America. And it's just like, oh no, what you want to do is just war crimes, man. You just want to slaughter people. You want to be a mass murderer, and society has accepted that you can say this kind of stuff on television because these people aren't on the same exact national team. They don't wear the red, white, and blue.
I'm trying to find a quote from George Armstrong Custer, before obviously who was killed, but by the Sioux, that where he's like, with just like one cavalry regiment, we can basically whip the entire native population of the Great Plains, and we saw like how and also another guy who had been in wars, just a delusional, bloodthirsty freak, and I think it's really kind of gross. Well, it's obviously very gross, but it's to see the way Fox News is sort of, because this is a right-wing organizing moment. Catherine Ballou, I believe, is the historian who talks about Vietnam and the withdrawal from Vietnam, and the years after that is a big moment for the right. And I worry we're at this too, with like vets coming home, and a certain percentage of those will be right-wing and thinking that they've been stabbed in the back by politicians, basically. And you're already seeing that from Jim Scudo saying,
think about our vets. Was this all for nothing?
Or like, so often I've seen the military given tasks by politicians who didn't have like the fortitude to like see them do the job or whatever like that. Like, this is extremely dangerous rhetoric.
We talked about this on the show on Friday, I think. Just why do we have, and this is a bit of a sidebar, but why do we have this class of journalists that fetishizes the military and kind of is drawn to the authoritarian hero nature of it, and believes that the scruples of politicians, the ones elected by the people, are what gets in the way of the real display of American might as done by the military. And they talk, he talks about the Taliban there in his tweet, or at least it reminds me that there's a lot in common, maybe not in proportionality, but the American right, they also want to limit the rights of women to control their own body. They also want to control the flow of information, at least sections of the right. They also want to live in a society that's homogeneous in terms of the religion that's expressed publicly. It's a trite thing from the American left to say, oh, the GOP is the Taliban of the United States. But the larger point is that right-wing movements share principles and share tendencies. And O'Neill displayed that so grossly there.
Right. I mean, yeah, the right wing is the fundamentalist religion, I guess is really what it is. Fundamentalist religion plus guys with guns.
Yeah.
Can I put up a really gross Jim Sciutto tweet for you guys?
Yes, I just saw you sent that. Put it up.
So he says, hanging on my office wall, Al-Qaeda fighters imprisoned in northern Afghanistan after the U.S. invasion. One of them smiled as he told me he'd kill Americans. Disturbing to see these prisons now emptied.
Oh, yes. He'd rather just warehouse them. Maybe Jim Sciutto could kind of have some introspection potentially. Why do maybe people in Afghanistan hate the United States? Al-Qaeda fighters, right? We all know, by the way, that who were deemed to be Al-Qaeda fighters was quite loose. There ever any introspection about why there is a whole section of the world that largely hates America? Maybe because we slaughter them at will and drop bombs on their weddings. Like, I don't know. It's just kind of how there's the entire Republican Party, and there are a lot of people in this country that hate Muslims in general because of 9/11, except we've done that on a systemic colonial scale for decades and decades and decades, not acts of terror that were more sporadic.
Sciutto is a 1992 graduate of Yale University, where he majored in Chinese history and graduated cum laude. He began his career in television as moderator and producer of PBS program The Student Press. Yeah, I mean, Sciutto is not somebody you should ever look to for any kind of line that is sort of contradictory of what the Pentagon or the CIA once said about these conflicts with a background like that.
Right. Joanna, just curious, you tightly called... rightly, I think this means, called the government in India as Hindu nationalists and many in the right wing in USA as white nationalists, but you have not even once called Taliban as Islamic or Muslim fundamentalists. You just call them extremists. Why not identify them better? Thank you, Tulsi Gabbard, for writing in. I mean, I don't know. Like, sure, they are Muslim fundamentalists. I don't know what that does.
Yeah, I think that's fairly obvious from any understanding of the Taliban. Is the degree of Muslim fundamentalism is there. I would think. I mean, this goes back to the call about let's make this all about religion. I mean, the problem isn't necessarily Islam. It's that country's been torn apart and has been the only people empowered in it have been warlords for like almost half a century.
Yeah. I mean, the Taliban is like a religious fundamentalist, at this point, guerrilla army that's trying to take back the government. That's, I guess, a more...
And we'll see, how well they're able to govern as that fundamentalist religious government. I think, from my understanding, which is not expert by any means, but there are certain regions where that's going to be harder for them to do than others.
I didn't mean to be rude there. I appreciate the I am. I just... there was no any conscious... choice made in that area. It's just like, I think more we're trying to focus on the larger power dynamics here.
I mean, the Taliban is not Modi. Like, there's a very different sort of...
Modi is empowered by the BJP and is the ruler of a nation of billions of people. He has a lot more power.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple.
Yeah.
Another trope I hate, radical Islam.
Right. Well, that's why I meant that said that Tulsi thing. That's like how she got her start, which I did like an interview back with her when I first started out, and I was like less yeah, I was really starting out, didn't fully understand how she got her rise. I regret not kind of asking her about that stuff. This is before her grift was more obvious to people. But that's how she got her start in terms of like cozying up to conservatives during the Obama years. Why isn't Obama saying radical Islam?
Yeah, why isn't Obama saying radical Islam and going to Friends of Israel meetings?
Exactly. Josh from Tucson, how are those cashews? Unfortunately, I'm out of cashews, so if I get cranky towards the end of the show, you'll understand why. Jonathan Armstead, Emma, get Ben Mankiewicz on to talk about movies and the Suicide Squad. He can be your Friday person. Maybe I should ask Ben. I think he's super busy. Ben is like one of my favorite people I've ever worked with at TYT. He is like the man. He's just so cool. And, you know, even if we have political disagreements, he's just really smart guy, like great guy. So maybe we'll do that. Leach, the second you take the first call and they want to talk about Hassan's house, you're going to want a beer. Also, no one on the left has given intellectually honest criticism addressing the problem people have had with his mansion. Because I don't even like want to give it the time of day, and I don't want Hassan to be targeted even more than he has been.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say a couple things. One, I think Hassan's response is fair enough. You know, the call for tax, that's the right thing. I think, and I also think it's difficult to buy a house in LA that's not a price that would make everybody go crazy.
Right.
I think, although, I think, look, I think that for a little bit, people are going to have to let off steam and be allowed to let off steam about people having extreme wealth.
Yeah.
And I think Hassan is a big enough boy to deal with this brief period of time. I don't think it proves certain arguments in the realm of politics that people are suggesting with regards to like who else has giant houses and stuff like that. But I mean, look, I think people can take shots at multi-million-dollar houses, but I ultimately don't think it's really worth addressing. As to per Emma's original point, I think it's sort of celebrity, like People magazine, but of the left.
Well,
now.
we're hypocritical because we like laugh at Jimmy's house, which, to be fair, I think was not a strong argument, and I'm probably not going to bring it up anymore because it was just more like reactionary. But it was more just a response to his like desire to be aesthetically working class.
Yeah, I also think, and with regards, like, I think Dave Rubin's house is very funny to still bring up. He's got a really big mortgage, and he always talks about moving to Florida and Texas, but I don't think it really matters, honestly. I think there's way too much oxygen I think there's too much oxygen about it, and I think there's too much oxygen defending Hassan, because I think Hassan's a big boy. Like I said, he can go, dip in his pool. He'll be fine.
Right. And Jimmy's a hypocrite. Hassan is not. Lulodo just saw a clip of Fox News casting down the Pfizer FDA approval. I think we played that, and it's super frustrating how they can get away with endangering millions of people's lives. Do you think there should be legal repercussions for such irresponsible reporting?
My goal isn't to advocate for use of libel law or whatever these sorts of penalties for. I think just create more understanding. I do think that we shouldn't be like making liability waivers shouldn't be a thing when it comes to certain businesses, and I think there should be some sort of statutorily empowered fining apparatus probably, but constructing one of these things, particularly in the current circumstances, seems like an impossible job.
Especially just these kinds of laws will always hurt the people who have less power and the left. Disproportionately. All right, let's go to clip 5. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen these interviews that Donnie O'Sullivan, CNN correspondent, does at these Trump rallies. Now, I did this for a while. Sometimes I feel conflicted about covering, or I did feel conflicted about doing that work, because a lot of these people are just regular people, and even if my intention wasn't to embarrass them, that's sometimes what would happen when I would cover these Trump rallies. They would get mocked. And I had like a lot of agita about that. I didn't really know if how good I felt about that, honestly. But then you come across certain people who are just very scary. And clearly radicalized. And then you go, okay, well, these are some of the consequences of these kinds of politics. And this interview by Donnie O'Sullivan, speaking to somebody outside of the America First rally in Des Moines, this is one of those clips.
You know, there's parts of the country now where you can't go into restaurants, bars, unless you're vaccinated.
I don't need the restaurants and the bars. Hell, I don't drink. I don't need to go to a restaurant. I can go shoot my dinner.
Yeah.
Just saying. I mean, there's millions of guns here, and you know, it took 11 days for them to take over Afghanistan. Wonder how many days. Just ask for a friend how many days it'd take the Patriots to take over this country. Think about it.
You don't want that to happen here,
I don't want it to happen, but if our country and our government and our Congress and Biden and them don't get their heads out of their butt, it's going to happen. I assure you, it's coming. I'm not vaccinated, and I'm not going to get vaccinated. Our days are numbered. It don't matter whether it's COVID or I can get in that truck and go over down the highway and get hit by a semi or T-bone and killed. It don't matter. You know, life is what it is. You know, we take it how God gives it to us.
But you wear a seatbelt, right?
Oh, yeah, of course.
So that's
but there's 50-50 chance that'll save you or it won't save you.
But isn't that sort of like taking a vaccine? You take the steps to protect yourself when you can?
No.
Okay. Go ahead, Matt.
The seatbelt thing, the 50-50, like even questioning seatbelt efficacy at a certain point. I mean, I don't know what to say.
Well, whatever. Say the figure is 50-50, right? Okay. You're still more safe from a car wreck if you have your damn seatbelt on. It increases the chances, which is the same thing as the vaccine. It increases the chances that you will survive or not get seriously ill from COVID. But that point is just like ancillary to the fantasizing about a Taliban-style takeover because of vaccine mandates. Like, I mean, if Biden and Congress don't get their act together, what does that mean? What does that mean? It's just, like, we're going to have a military-style or guerrilla-style takeover of right-wingers with guns at the rally, at the America First rally in the country. If the government implements a policy that you don't necessarily like or find convenient, like, it's just crazy. It's crazy. And it doesn't matter what the policy is. Oh, if a migrant caravan comes in, we're going to go down and shoot them. Oh, if, you know, Democrats put in place their radical agenda, critical race theory, we're going to do the same thing there. Like, that, I don't know. I mean, these things seem more and more frequent, and I don't know if I'm imagining it. I don't necessarily know if, like, this is just being documented more, or no. I really think it's percolating.
The Republican Party is stoking political violence for electoral purposes. I mean, that's what Mo Brooks said about what was it? The guy who had the bomb in the truck in the Capitol. It said, like, well, we understand.
It's because socialism is hurting the country, right?
You got to vote instead. And of course, if this show came out and said, well, we understand your frustration with fascism, but don't go to those baseball games armed, people would understand how outrageous of a statement that is.
Yeah. Referring to the shooting of Scalise.
But that's where the Republican Party just is, and the question is, like, does it spill out into stochastic violence? I mean, stochastic, like, you know, how you turn the temperature up in a boiling kettle of water, and more of the more splash comes up from the bubbles when you turn up the heat. That's what they're doing, and a splash being somebody taking their gun that they used, I guess, to go kill deer or whatever that guy was thinking he was going to live off of, and turn it against, you know, a courthouse or something like that. It's delusional, and it's, I mean, ultimately pathetic. Like, the idea that you're going to go kill your food year round, good luck with that. You're going to run into the state which licenses big game hunting, for instance, and if everybody does that, we will run out of deer in this country.
Well, that's the exact kind of Biden tyranny that's gonna push people into becoming the American Taliban and taking to the streets with all those guns.
Like, that's a guy who literally is ready to die because an accepting of death, whatever way it comes, because this country told him a lie about individuality and how he doesn't live in a society when in fact he does.
Right. Although he is in favor of some kind of collective action.
Wearing seatbelts.
But even that, the thing he said at the end, that 50-50 will save you or kill you, that is old anti-seatbelt propaganda saying that actually sometimes when you get in a car crash, your seatbelt will trap you in the car and you might, like, burn to death because you can't escape.
Yeah. Right. All right. Take a few more calls. Calling from an 847 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it's Phil from the Chicago suburbs.
Hi, Phil.
I warn you, I'm going to try to be funny, so I apologize for that.
Okay.
So I have a proposed character in the style of Michael Brooks.
Okay.
And the character is Charlie Kirk Thomas Sankara. And I have observed 5 similarities between them that motivates this. So the first is you guys did a clip on May 9th called Charlie Kirk Almost Learns a New Word. Do you remember this? Where he misused the concept of the tragedy of the commons. Well, what he said there, it seems like he was pushing for land reform. He wants everybody to be a homeowner and have roots in their community. The second thing is, do you remember what he said about when he started defaming Simone Biles?
No.
For pulling out of an Olympic event. She was, having issues, and she pulled out of a team event because she didn't want to jeopardize her teammates. And apparently that worked. But Charlie Kirk, you've done a good job talking about how these people choose their targets. Charlie Kirk denounced Simone Biles for being unpatriotic, all this stuff. That's kind of similar to maybe some of the worst excesses of the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution going after lazy workers.
Okay.
Third, they're both persecuted. Sankara was assassinated at the age of 37 in a pro-France, pro-IMF coup, and Charlie Kirk had water thrown at him once by Antifa. They were both very precocious, and they both supported protest movements against the French government. And I would note also that I think the coup guy, I don't know how to pronounce it, Blaise Compaoré or whatever, is about to go on trial.
Right. So this is the description of an impression.
Yes, that's correct. It's similar to the modern Seinfeld Twitter, where they know it's never going to get made. But
okay.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, now it's documented for all of us to. Oh, he hung up.
And no one needs to attempt it.
Yeah. Because we have the framework anyway, so might as well just leave it at that.
I mean, that's almost funnier than the impression itself, I think.
Honestly. Calling from a 321 number. If I can pick up 321 number. Who's this?
Is
where you
this
calling?
me?
Yeah.
Hey, this is Marcus the Brazilian. How's it going, guys?
I'm Marcus the Brazilian. Going well.
Hey, Emma, I think it's the first time I've called in while you've been on the show.
Yeah.
So, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Love all the work you've done over at TYT. It's, all the work you did over there is incredible. I just want to put that out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just calling to see, I don't know if you guys have touched on this already. So, apologies if you have, but just seeing if you guys have brought up recent events that have gone over in Brazil. And what I'm referring to is like Bolsonaro taking some pages out of Trump's book and fear-mongering about the election coming up.
Yes.
Election fraud.
We've covered it a little bit.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, so he did like a military parade in front of Congress while Congress was voting on, a bill to go back to paper voting rather than the electronic voting, because he was, fear-mongering about,
the machines.
Discrepancies. Yeah, the machines. So he did this military parade with tanks, and it's like harks back to the military dictatorship that he's so much of a fan of, and it's just like really, it's just really riveting to see military tanks driving in front of the Congress building as they're voting. Like it's like a threat. And also, like, I think today, the military police is like posturing about like a coup, even though they can't technically do that. That's like, if there was going to be a coup, it would be the military, not the police.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, these military forces that are very much in favor of Bolsonaro's fascism, just like flexing, because they know, like the polls are showing, Lula would
massive lead.
Bolsonaro.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Bolsonaro does not have good poll numbers, so that's what they're doing. So just wanted to put that out there. I wasn't 100% sure if you guys were covering what's going on down there, but it's like scary stuff.
Yeah, I think we covered it in passing.
I mean, we talked a little bit about it on Left Reckoning with Bestner and Davison, mainly in the context of an international, not specific to Brazil, but like that it's just a growing pattern of they're blaming the election machines,
right?
That sort of thing. But
right.
Yeah, we should. I mean, it's a scary pattern generally. Peru, you saw the same thing from Fujimori. Elections are going to take a beating from the right in the next decade, I think, and the validity of them, and it's a global problem. But yeah, I think Brazil is the most acute maybe right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of strange, like seeing like flashbacks of what happened last year in the election here happening currently over in Brazil, where I have family and stuff, and it's just like.
Yeah.
Is there going to be like a possible insurrection if, like, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And in addition to just kind of the acute COVID problems that are happening in Brazil, I mean, like the fact that vaccines were basically accessible for quite a while, and due to Bolsonaro and his ilk's corruption, they like needed to get a cut before approving, and there's been that lag. I did an interview for the Peacock show on that. It's scary times, and like I don't know, praying for your family, or I don't really pray, but thinking of them.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks so much. All right, guys, I'll let you go. Have a good one.
Thanks, Marcus. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Let's turn to Mo Brooks. So Mo Brooks was opening for Donald Trump at his rally in Alabama, and we covered already that Trump got booed after he said that I got vaccinated and you should too. Kind of quickly walked it back with a string of non sequitur qualifiers in order to get the crowd back on his side. And he's not the only one getting booed, though. Mo Brooks, the opening act, met with a less than warm reception because he said it's time to move on from Trump's loss in 2020.
There are some people who are despondent about the voter fraud and election theft in 2020. Folks, put that behind you. Put that behind you. Yes. Look forward. Look forward. Look forward. No. Beat them in 2022. Beat them in 2024.
Pause it for a second.
All right.
Like, isn't it just beat them in 2022? No! Beat them in 2024. Ah! I just like love the concept of losing the election in 2022 to own the libs, and in 2024. You know, it's kind of a liberal fantasy, probably not going to happen, but continue. Sorry, Bradley.
All right. Well, look back at it, but go forward and take advantage of it. We've got to win in 2022. We've got to win in 2024. That's what we've got to do.
Yeah, consternation. They just would rather focus on
the Blacks for Trump guy's back behind.
As I was about to say, I've had a few interactions with that guy. He is at every single Trump rally, and so now, bit of a lull in his career? Question mark during the pandemic, and maybe when Trump was out of office. But now he's back on the trail.
That clip though is like the Hannibal Buress picture. Like, why are you yelling at me? I'm right.
Right. Yes. Well, I have negative sympathy. In fact, I have immense Schadenfreude to watch Mo Brooks get booed by the monster he created as he opens the speech talking about, election fraud and speaking at it as if it's fact.
That's why I think no journalist should interview a Republican without asking them the question, did Biden win the election fairly, or was it stolen from Donald Trump? Because Mo,
don't entertain it.
Well, that's the thing is, when you look forward, are you looking forward from a place where Trump should be the president, or that Biden actually won? And you're not, and if you're not looking forward in the same direction if you don't figure out what you're looking forward from in that regard.
Right. Yeah. And also what you're doing is just teeing up a guy like Mo Brooks to be able to answer a question in a way that riles up the base that's voting for him, but that does immense damage the more and more this is legitimized. Like, guys like Mo Brooks, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, they want to get asked a question like that because they want to be able to go on the record to say, I'm on the Lindell side, I'm on the Trump side, I'm not the Romney type. And that's helpful for their purposes, but for the country, it's actually really, really scary. And so making that conversation a joke, making that even a question is treating it with more legitimacy than it should be treated with. So, but fun to watch him get booed. Fun to watch Trump get booed too. Until you think about it a little too hard.
No, I think it's just fun. Like, I think the as Sam says, that it's already baked into the cake. The negative effects, to see Trump actually have to face it, is that I would love to see that more of that.
I would love to hear what he thinks about it behind the scenes. I mean, the contempt that he has for his voters, and Mo Brooks for that matter, like, they don't Trump probably thinks everybody should get vaccinated, and so behind the scenes he's probably just like, these idiots. And Mo Brooks doesn't think that the election actually was illegitimate, just using it as a tool for himself. Behind the scenes thinks these idiots. There are a lot of politicians that really look down on their voters. Republicans are at the tippy top of that, but many Democrats as well. It's a good indicator of a kind of politician you can trust when they genuinely have faith in the people that, like, they're trying to represent and want to give them dignity and represent them adequately. A lot of progressives come to mind. Bernie Sanders' campaign comes to mind. That's the antithesis of that. What you see at the Save America rally, or which one's that?
America First.
America First, great. Yeah, it's the antithesis of that. So Joni Ernst, let's turn to that one, if we can. Joni Ernst was asked a question on ABC Sunday about Afghanistan and our withdrawal from there. Martha Raddatz asked this question in such a leading way that I found it to be incredibly glaring and just an indicator of where a lot of the press lies on this and how they lead our politicians in the course of these interviews to the consensus that they're trying to manufacture. Consent, you could say, that they're trying to manufacture. I don't know if people are familiar with that. Keep going.
So you would advocate for sending in more troops to do this, no matter how many it took? Well, I would. But again, evaluating the situation on the ground, if the Taliban is saying that Americans can travel safely to the airport, then there is no better way to make sure they get safely to the airport than to use our military to escort them. We have heard that other military forces from other countries are doing that. Americans, we should be able to do that as well. I think it's important.
Hey, Bradley,
that we
I think
make
I was
sure
referencing
we're up.
other Joni Ernst clip. If we still have that in the Slack.
Morning to you, Senator. You heard Secretary Austin say they're looking at every possible way to get Americans and Afghans out. They're now activating that Civil Reserve Air Fleet. But the problem is getting to the airport itself. You're a veteran. Do you think they should be sending convoys into the city?
Yes, Martha, and thank you so much for having me on. Absolutely. We should be doing everything possible to get Americans safely to the airport.
So, you're a veteran, gives her the legitimacy, asks her a very specific question about tactically what should be happening. And then Joni Ernst goes, yes, absolutely. And then goes in to buttress the entire framing of the question. Like, look, I've conducted interviews with progressive politicians where it's framed that way because I'm open about my perspective. I'm a progressive. And shouldn't we be doing this? Like, don't you agree? But the difference is that that's not how that's presented. This is presented as, oh, this is the only way that we can move forward. This is the, this is the legitimate course of action. And so that bugs me. That bugs me. And it reminds me a lot of what we saw at the height of the Iraq wars and the Afghanistan war. Obviously, we're seeing shades of it now. But this is a huge, huge problem in our press. And that particular framing is something you're going to see all over the media, but it was fairly egregious in my view. All right, let's take a few more IMs. Or read some IMs. Matt stole my girlfriend. Thoughts on current affairs? Yeah, go on.
Well, I mean, I just from the outside, I would say cooperative. I think I agree with the employees that you should have a more cooperative workplace. And I hope that it gets resolved in a satisfactory way because I liked current affairs.
I agree. Support them from the outside. I understand it seems like a little messy in terms of personal relationships, but the way Nathan has handled it is clearly not good. And I don't necessarily know how when somebody, it's clearly his pet project and something he has a lot of pride in, and he did not want to relinquish control of that, but he didn't go about it the right way. And I guess he could still maintain editor-in-chief status and have a cooperative workplace in some fashion. Sandy Martin, sorry to bring up Afghanistan again. When I served in Afghanistan in 2010 in the Canadian Armed Forces, the people hated American military as they would kill anyone who they even remotely thought would be a threat. The rest of us in the NATO countries were focused on actually helping local communities with building schools and drilling wells. I am heartbroken for the people back in Afghanistan. Don't apologize. Thank you for writing in. The Big Caker, them voting in 2022 or 24 would require them to make it past COVID to be able to vote. Dr. Chow's MD, the argument for people to say the words radical Islam seems like a disingenuous request. The reason being saying radical Islam implies that there is a non-radical Islam, which definitely is a thing that exists, but something the people demanding use of the term radical would probably not agree exists. They just don't like Islam in all forms.
Yeah, to them, radical Islam is Islam.
Angel, what's this Twitter drama about Jimmy Dore and Sam Seder? Is Sam in Twitter drama right now?
I don't think it's much. I think basically Jimmy Dore was attacking Ryan Grimm.
I saw that right.
Because Ryan Grimm came up on the spinner of people to attack, and
a rare man.
And Grimm said, "What do you say? Oh yeah, Jimmy's doing the come on my show," and Ryan's like, "Well, I'll come on your show after you talk to Sam Seder," and then Jimmy shut up.
Yeah, after he talks about Ryan's kids on the regular and said some weird sexual thing about Ryan. He wants Ryan to come on his show.
He's a sad guy, but those live shows look like really good use of people's money. So I hope those continue.
I can't believe I exist in a world where someone puts a screenshot up of my tweet and like boos it in an auditorium.
That's where we're at.
What?
Hey, that you gotta pay.
And like I try to describe this to people who don't follow, like in my life, they're like, what?
Yeah.
Somebody's gotta pay for that beautiful house.
Ah! I can't believe, like, sometimes I just think about my job and it's just so silly. Denver Dave, not even my job. The job isn't the silly part. The, like, other people, the drama surrounding the job is just insane. Transistor Rodeo. As to the movies that use history for their narrative, a good example of the positive use of this tool was the HBO series The Watchmen and the Tulsa Massacre. Seems like a majority of America, including me, wasn't aware what happened to Black Wall Street. I still have not seen Watchmen, but I've heard that was really good. I'm like not that into superhero stuff, so.
No, I think it's bad. I think it's infantile. I just looked up ticket prices. $25 to go see Jimmy Dore put up pictures of Emma Vigeland and Kyle Kalinske a cuck.
What function does that serve for you?
I think it's leading everyone closer to Medicare for all. But
Me too. You're right. Okay. Is This Me says, if I had 10 divisions over those men, our troubles here would be over very quickly. You have to have men who are moral and at the same time who are able to use their primordial instincts to kill without feeling, without passion, without judgment, because it's judgment that defeats us, is the quote. Was that the quote you were trying to pull up earlier, Matt?
Is that the Custer quote? I don't know if I've heard it in full like that.
Sam from Ottawa. One country has a war hawk, it results in a genocide. 2 countries have a war hawk, you get endless wars. Artax. Hey, MR Crew, since mail delivery is frowned upon, I can bring some homegrown flour with me on my trip to down to Brooklyn in October. Like, no, I mean, it's not frowned upon. I don't care, but I don't want you to get in trouble for some bizarre reason for sending something that's like technically federally illegal through the federal mail system. Delta Blues. John Cena's character Peacemaker in the new Suicide Squad has a line that says, I love peace. I don't care how many men, women, and children I have to kill to obtain it. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. The Chris Lapaco. Drunks don't get liver transplants. People can't smoke to be eligible for lung transplants. I know we want everyone to get health care, but we also want people to have clean drinking water. Furthermore, unvaccinated people are restricting other people from having access to healthcare by clogging up hospitals. That's true. They've been poisoning the air, and now they're poisoning the water. Enough is enough. No entry to hospitals without proof of vaccination. Boom. Again, I mean,
that might feel good to say. I just don't think it's good policy.
I agree. I agree. And I also don't think it's moral. Like,
the purpose of a hospital should be to treat people, not to send messages about, politics and where you should get your news from.
Yeah. Everybody just, like, there's principles in this country. It's the same thing for or there's principles on the left. It's the same thing for the death penalty. Like, do I think this mass murderer or this horrible person in some specific case should be killed? If it was up to me, or like, I don't even know, because I hate bloodshed no matter what. But no, you apply a principle in terms of building a more equitable society universally, and it doesn't matter how ignorant people are and what their choices are.
Because I just think like focusing on the ignorance of the average person is a recipe to be a reactionary. I just don't see the upshot of it that leads to a liberatory politics in any sort of path.
The Machine says, are we sure Emma is not a libertarian? I think we are.
I think we're pretty sure about that.
I think we're pretty sure. Pirate Amy Goodman, given what happened last time Sam went on vacation, someone needs to check to see if Bill O'Reilly is okay. He didn't look that okay last week.
Yeah, we did watch some Bill O'Reilly last week. He is still broadcasting, still imbibing, I think, too.
Saying, why is Disney woke?
Right. FDA approval, more like fascist Democrat Antifa approval. Remember, reach. All right, I'm not reading that. I do remember. I'm still embarrassed.
Super close.
Yeah. Riley Kuehl needed a sound drop of Michael doing Jagoff impressions. Rob from Dedham. Emma, I hope you are charging a fair price for the real estate you take up in Jimmy's head. I wish I could like profit off of with all this weird harassment he's directed towards me, but not a ton of money in it.
He's got to make content though, so hate about Emma, Kyle Kalinske now. That's good political education. Again, for $25 a pop at those live shows, I would feel proud to be up on that stage with Jimmy.
Yep. Vibe check. Emma, if Sam Seder is America's dad, then is it simply inevitable that you will soon be America's much cooler and hip aunt? I'm down with being a cool aunt.
I'm actually going to be an uncle in the next week or two.
Oh my god, really?
Yeah. Very bad. Yeah.
Do you guys know the sex?
I don't think so, no.
Wow. Very exciting. Sanchez Succhio, Nathan Robinson busted employee organizing. There's no difference between what he did and the way the New York Times is trying to bust union efforts there.
Yeah, you can't do a piece saying unions are good for all organizations except this one, and then do that argument.
Yeah.
And like I understand, like, of course in a vacuum it's better to have pay parity than not pay parity, but if people want to have more editorial control over their workplace that they're building together, like I understand Nathan's very central to that magazine, but I also like have learned of a lot of people through that magazine. That's a collective.
Well, he's probably inflating. I mean, it's just like by the nature of creating something, you might make your importance seem more than it is.
Yeah, but that's a fundamentally that's a tendency that comes up against particularly socialist.
Yes, I agree.
Theory.
Final call of the day. Oh, I clicked on something. Final call of the day. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Me?
You?
Oh, you didn't say the number.
Oh, sorry. I said that I'm gonna get hangry at the end of the show and my stomach's grumbling because I haven't had cashews yet. What's up? 917.
Alex from New York.
Alex from New York. What's up, my friend?
I just wanted to say thank you. This was from weeks ago with the Crowder thing. You used my memes I made. Thank you very much.
What do you mean?
The one that said, ladies and gentlemen, we fucking nailed them.
Oh, that was you?
That was me.
Ugh. Because that expression of joy on Sam's face was just so amazing.
I know. It was beautiful. Oh, man, that was so good. Sometimes I just watch that clip just to
feel
relive
something.
The moment. And that animation was great.
Yeah.
Anyways, today's matchup, we're going to do Lindsey Graham versus Mitch McConnell, and Joni Ernst, since you brought her up, and Michelle Bachmann.
The second one's harder. I think Mitch would like suck the blood out of Lindsey Graham, and Lindsey Graham would let him. Like Lindsey Graham wouldn't want to fight. Mitch, he's the ultimate like authoritarian, bowing his head to the bigger gorilla type. So Lindsey Graham would just like turtle on his back. You know what I mean? Fetal position kind of situation.
Ironic that he would be the turtle in that situation.
Exactly. But Mitch McConnell wouldn't even, no matter how much Lindsey Graham cried uncle, immediately begged for mercy, McConnell would, I think, eat him. And then Joni Ernst versus Michelle Bachmann's actually kind of a tough one. Because I think Joni Ernst, because she's a veteran, she probably, she's probably pretty
That hair looks
well-versed
like
in...
some kind of weapon.
But we know Bachman fights dirty. We got to know that.
He did used to castrate pigs. I remember that.
Yes,
Joni Ernst did, right? Yeah, I mean, I think she's got Bachman. Bachman's not a scrapper. I think she's like.
Well, she went away so easily.
Yeah, she's like the type of woman who like domineers her like church group and turns into something really dark. Like I don't think she's a physical force really than Joni Ernst. I mean, Joni, yeah, you've castrated a pig. You can, yeah, you've graduated.
Right. All right, Alex, appreciate it.
Watch Suicide Squad. It's great.
It's good?
Yes, it's fantastic.
I'm probably not going to, but thanks for the recommendation. I'm going to watch The Green Knight. I can't wait.
I'm excited for that too.
Honestly, like that, Sir Gawain and The Green Knight, the source material, is probably one of the first things in my entry-level English course that made me consider becoming an English major in college, because it's a wild, bizarre story, more than you would think from like, I don't know, actually a lot of English literature like Chaucer, like you'd think that stuff's boring, and actually it's very interesting.
Appreciate it, Alex.
Take care.
Later. We're gonna read some IMs and then we're gonna get out of here. Maddie Light, Bachman used to be a Wiccan, so she has magic on her side. You're thinking of
Christina O'Donnell.
Christina O'Donnell, yeah.
Yeah, no, Bachman wouldn't tolerate any kind of Wiccan around her.
Cap No Fun, The Green Knight is really dope too, but the Suicide Squad is way better than it has any right to be. That's what I'm hearing. Oh, let me hang up the phones. I'm sorry, guys. That was the final call.
I just don't have an appetite for superhero movies.
I know,
of
me too.
any variety.
Me too.
Also, guys, just to clarify in the IM, someone said that quote was Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now.
Oh, okay. So not Custer.
Yeah, not the Custer quote, yeah.
Sam from Ottawa, Emma, make a catfish Twitter with a Patreon that hates on yourself. Monetize that door hate. That was pretty funny. Prairie Flower Kowalski from Nebraska. People need to use the Discord more. We've got memes and I've been normalizing suns out, guns out. We demand to see the Seder cannons. Left is bet. Appreciate that, Kowalski. Chicken Salad Restaurant. I live in Vermont where 85% of the people are vaccinated in a county where about 12 people have COVID at any given time. Considering the vaccines have a 95% efficacy, I'm having trouble being concerned about the Delta variant in my own life, yet the CDC says our country is at high risk. What's the deal? I mean, I don't know if the 95% figure is applicable to the Delta variant. We are still getting data about that. But if you're in Vermont, I totally understand being less concerned about it. My stepbrother lives up in Vermont, and like my mother has gone to visit him and stuff, and it's like barely been an issue the entire time there. So
yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, they've just never had a real problem with deaths there. I'm looking, like, their highs were like still like single digits.
It's unbelievable
in the peak. So it's like, yeah, I wouldn't be super concerned either. I think you guys are probably all right. I mean, cases are going up again. It looks like, but that's also because it looks like cases were never that bad to begin with there. So I think that's a good place probably to be, generally speaking.
Definitely.
And notably with a Republican governor, by the way.
Yeah. Just a few more. Anonymous majority, you can't not accept patients at hospitals because they are not vaccinated. It's immoral. However, living with a semi-capitalistic healthcare system, we should force a premium for unvaccinated patients. Again, we like, I'm sorry guys, we're not punishing people who are sick with COVID. It's just like, that's bad politics and not right.
And honestly, it's a bad impulse, and you should guard against it in yourself. The impulse shouldn't be to look for who you can blame, that's removed from power.
Look up.
It's just, honestly, it's bad. It's bad that people have that impulse, and they should knock it off.
It causes resentment, and it really brings no one to our side. And we all have people in our lives that most of us have people in our lives that are like not making good choices about the vaccine, and they can still be good people in other ways. Eat the rich. What if we let alcoholics have replacement livers and also made it easier to treat the addiction? Allow abortions but provide birth control and sex education? You can't come in at the end to get mad at the result of decades of an environment. I'm not sure. I think I know what you mean, but We're gonna do 2 more. Emma's pirate impressions. Listen, the Democrats stole the 2020 election, so there's no reason for a true patriot to vote ever again because they will just steal all the elections. Good point. And Captain Rick is the final IM of the day. I wish I had the soundboard. Hey, shush on the Vermont stuff. We don't need to add this mass immigration we're seeing from more urban states. Housing prices are fucked right now. All right, guys. We're ending right around 2:30 this time. Again, I want to apologize for the early exit on Friday. If you were watching, you probably saw my camera getting all screwy, and we were just having some issues that extended beyond that, so I apologize again, but full show for you today. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. Finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light's shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds